Hey, I'm Bill Miller, Executive Director of the North American Hunting Club and host of North American Hunter Television. I'm blessed to spend a lot of time in the field every year, but that also means I spend a lot of time getting ready to go hunting. Over the decades, I'd have to say that I've learned almost as much from the preparation as I have from the actual time spent in the field. Take scope mounting, for example. Just like I'll bet you do, I used to rely on the gunsmith at my favorite sporting goods store to mount the optical sights on my firearms, from rifles through muzzle loaders and slug guns to pistols. A number of things came together to change that. One is the economy. It costs me almost nothing but a little bit of my time to mount my own scopes at home. For every scope I mount myself, it buys another box of ammunition. But the biggest game changer is the availability of gunsmithing quality tools to consumers like us. Having the right tools makes mounting your own scopes quick, easy, and precise. Today I'm mounting this Weaver Super Slam scope on this bolt action 30-06. We're using a one-piece Weaver base and Grand Slam steel rings. When choosing rings, there are key characteristics in both aluminum and steel to consider. Aluminum rings weigh less and come in a variety of styles. A quality aluminum ring will handle heavy recoiling rifles. And finally, aluminum rings won't rust. Steel rings are extremely strong and durable. Most shooters and hunters prefer steel when shooting Magnum rifles with stout recoil. Now, steel rings traditionally up your mounting price tag, and you may need to have additional rust protection. As important to making this a fast and precise job are the tools. We're using the new Weaver scope mounting kit, which includes a torque wrench, SureThread, lapping bar and alignment pin set, and modular level system. We also have some Outers Crud Cutter degreaser. And finally, the new Weaver Gunsmithing Center offers a sweet and steady base of operation. Let's get started. Safety is always first, so remove the bolt entirely and visibly inspect that the rifle is empty. Place the rifle securely in the Weaver Gunsmithing Center's vise. Using the Weaver driver and tool bits of the precisely correct size, I've already removed the filler screws from the holes drilled and tapped in the top of the receiver. I like to keep these screws in a secure place in case I ever decide to sell or trade the gun, but keep the scope and bases. Putting these screws back in the rifle will help you get top dollar on the used gun market. Degrease these holes with a couple drops of Crud Cutter on a cotton swab. Remove your scope, bases, and rings from their packaging, and read the instructions from the start to finish twice. You may have mounted scopes before, but likely you're not doing it every day. So there are things you may have forgotten or nuances about the new rig that you may not know about. Okay, we're ready to get started. Like the instructions told us, basically we should plan to mount this scope twice. The first time through we'll assemble it lightly just to make sure everything fits. And then the second time we'll add SureThread to the screws and absolutely lock everything in place. Lay the base, or bases if it's a two-piece, on top of the receiver, watching carefully that the holes in the base line up precisely with the holes in the receiver. Thread the screws in place and just snug them up. Don't fully tighten at this stage. With a bore light, look inside the receiver to inspect and make certain that the screws are not protruding into the action. Additionally, if the size of the bolt run allows, put your finger inside to feel and confirm the screws are not protruding into the receiver. Finally, replace the bolt and operate the action. And that confirms there's no interference. Then you remove the bolt again and set it aside. At this point, you can remove the screws, place one drop of SureThread onto the threads, thread them back into the holes, and tighten them down with the Weaver torque wrench set to the torque setting provided in the instructions with the bases, until the torque wrench clicks. Before you remove the rings from the packaging, confirm that you have the proper height for the scope that you're mounting. The Weaver Super Slam 3-15 has a 42mm objective lens. Medium height rings only allow a 40mm objective, so we're going to need to use high rings for this application. Always select the proper rings that will allow you to mount the scope as low as possible to the gun. Having the scope low to the bore promotes better shooting technique. Your cheek is more tightly and consistently welded to the stock, especially on guns with stocks built for open sights that sit right on top of the barrel. Separate the ring caps from the saddles. Carefully set aside the caps and the screws. Even with this great parts tray included with the Weaver Gunsmithing Center, I like to lay the parts on a piece of duct tape rolled sticky side out so they don't escape to the floor and under my workbench. Position the rings in the grooves of the Weaver style bases. Depending on the bases, you'll have some options in which slots to place these rings. I always start with one in the farthest forward groove and one in the furthest back groove. If final positioning of the scope and the operation of the action allows, this placement of the rings offers the widest stance of support for the scope tube. Lay the scope in place on the saddles of the rings, add the caps, and install the cap screws. Tighten the cap screws only enough to still allow the scope to move and turn freely in the rings. Now gently pick the rifle out of the vise, mount it in shooting position with the forestock rested on a pad or on your hand. Then look through the scope like you naturally would. You want to have the scope set on the highest power possible because that's the most sensitive. Now adjust the scope back and forth in the rings until you get a nice clear view from edge to edge in the scope. You don't want to have to crane your head and neck to do it. That looks pretty good. Once you've achieved this, gently place the rifle back in the vise and with a small piece of masking tape, index the scope's position in relation to the inside of one ring. Now take a break, relax, and then naturally shoulder the rifle again. The full view at high power should be easy and natural when you mount the gun. If not, repeat the adjustment and indexing until you mount at least twice in a row without any adjustment. Now we just put the rifle back in the vise, tighten it up a bit, put the bolt back in to check and make sure that we've got clearance and clean operation. You now have the scope in the proper position front to back and you have it indexed. Now during the process you may have had to move the rings into different grooves in the base to accommodate the turrets and the bells. Remove the ring mounting screws, apply sure thread, then put the screws back in. And finally, tighten them in place with the torque wrench set properly. This next step is little known and seldom practiced outside of professional gunsmith shops, but it's crucially important to making sure your scope is mounted properly. First, you want to check the initial alignment of your scope rings. To do that, you mark each ring cap, indexing top to bottom, then remove the scope. Place the alignment pins in each ring saddle pointing at each other and center the points between the rings. Replace the cap rings and torque the cap screws to specifications using the Weaver torque wrench. If the points are in alignment, the rings don't necessarily need to be lapped, but you can improve the contact of the saddles and caps to the scope body if you follow through the lapping process. If the points are not in alignment, you'll definitely need to lap the scope rings. To do that, you remove each ring cap and alignment pin. Place a small amount of lapping compound on the inside of each ring cap and saddle. Place the lapping bar in the ring saddles with the handle attached to the center hole of the lapping bar. If the rings are closely spaced to the handle, it can be attached to the end hole of the lapping bar. Reinstall the caps and tighten the screws only enough that the lapping bar can still be rotated. Rotate the lapping bar and move it back and forward at the same time. As the material is worn from the rings, the ring cap screws can be tightened a little bit more. You can check your progress by removing the ring caps and the mounting bar, cleaning off all of the lapping compound, and remount the alignment pins to check the alignment. Be careful that you don't remove too much material so the rings will not tighten to the scope. You want to remove about 3/4 of the finish, and there still should be a gap between the cap and the saddle. When you're finished lapping the rings, remove the caps and clean off all of the lapping compound from the rings and screws. Place the scope back in the saddle positioned with the tape index mark. By taking this extra step of lapping, we've removed the tiniest bit of metal from inside the scope rings and ensured even pressure on the scope tube, which is essential to consistent accuracy. Next, we'll use the Weaver modular level system to ensure that the scope's reticle is exactly perpendicular and parallel to the line of the bore. Before the availability of these levels, this precision was always guesswork on the part of the amateur gunsmith. Now, it's quick and easy to be precise. Lay the level on the bolt guide rails. Now the level system attaches differently for other actions and types of firearms. Center the bubble by tipping the rifle back and forth in the vise. Then set the second level on the turret cap covering the elevation adjustment. The level can also be attached with double-sided tape. Center its bubble by turning the scope in the rings. Go back to be sure you didn't jostle the rifle making this adjustment. If you did, adjust the rifle and go back and adjust the scope. Do this until both bubbles are perfectly centered. Again, recheck both the masking tape index and the bubbles on the levels and make any last-second adjustments as necessary. Using your torque wrench set to the specified torque, tighten each screw in the rings until the wrench clicks. Use equal pressure and tighten so the gap is the same on each side of the rings. The torque wrench is one of the most important tools in the entire process. First, it makes sure that we don't over-tighten anything. And secondly, especially when it comes to tightening the screws in the scope rings, it ensures that even pressure is placed on the scope tube. Lab tests have shown that one of the biggest detriments to scope accuracy is uneven pressure on the tube. With this, you know it's right. So there you have it. A scope that we've mounted quickly, easily, and precisely. And now comes my favorite part, the sight-in. I get to go shooting.